Okay, ready to make that community garden dream a reality? I'm loving the enthusiasm. We're diving into chapter 2 of this handbook,
Oh, yeah.
all about planning and organization. You know, that foundation you need before even thinking about planting.
It really is amazing how much goes into a successful community garden, before anyone even picks up a shovel.
Yeah.
Like this chapter makes it clear a good plan is so important. It's like building a house, right?
Uh-huh.
You wouldn't start without blueprints.
Definitely not. So, blueprints for community gardens.
Yeah.
First up, chapter 2.1,
Yeah.
building a community garden team. More than just a bunch of green thumbs, I'm guessing.
Oh, for sure. It's assembling a team, but with diverse skills.
Yeah.
And clear roles. Like you need someone for communication, someone to organize the work days, someone who's good with finances to manage the budget, It takes a whole village.
A village to raise a garden. I like that. And finding those villagers, keeping them enthusiastic, that's got to be key.
Totally.
The handbook mentions stakeholders. What's that about?
Stakeholders are basically anyone who's got an interest in the garden doing well. So yeah, the gardeners themselves, but also think local businesses, community groups, even just the neighbors. Get them on board early makes a huge difference.
Makes sense building that support network right from the start. Now, I've heard volunteer burnout is a big issue for a lot of these gardens. Does the handbook address that?
Absolutely. It's not just recruiting volunteers, it's keeping them. Right. So adequate training is huge, recognizing their contributions, making them feel appreciated, and that whole sense of community,
Yeah.
People are more likely to stay involved when they feel valued, like they're part of something bigger.
It's not just giving tasks, it's that positive environment. Makes sense. Okay, let's move on to location. Chapter 2.2, choosing the right location. I'm guessing that's crucial.
Make or break, honestly.
Wow.
Location affects everything. What you can grow, how well the whole thing succeeds. The handbook, first thing it stresses is sunlight, at least 6 hours a day, direct sunlight on that site.
Makes sense. Plants need that sunshine like we need coffee.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What else? Water access. Hauling buckets gets old fast. Ideally, you've got a water source nearby, hose bib, rain barrel, something like that. And then soil quality. Can't forget that.
Oh, the soil testing.
Yeah.
We covered that in our last deep dive. So much going on beneath the surface. Anything else about location that might surprise people?
It actually brings up safety, which gets overlooked. The location needs to be safe, especially if it's open to the public or if there are kids involved. So think proximity to traffic, visibility, any hazards on the site itself.
Makes sense. Welcoming and safe.
Good.
Got to talk about the less glamorous stuff now, but super important. Legal side of things. The handbook covers that, right?
Oh, absolutely. Chapter 2.4, legal considerations and permits. It can feel overwhelming, but you have to make sure you're allowed to use the land, public or private.
I bet there are a lot of rules to figure out. What should we be paying attention to?
Well, it dives into zoning laws. Those determine what you can even do on a piece of land. You might need special permits depending on what you're planning, where you are, and then formal agreements, leases, especially on private land.
So it's not as simple as finding an empty lot and just starting to dig.
Nope.
What about building stuff, like a shed or a greenhouse?
Right. Any permanent structure, you'll likely need building permits. The handbook gets into the types, how to obtain them, and then liability, too. Got to make sure the garden's safe, you're protected if there are accidents.
Okay, so location secured, legal stuff sorted. Now for the fun part. Chapter 2.3, developing a vision and mission. This is where we dream big, right?
This is it. Defining the purpose of the garden. What are you hoping to achieve? What impact on the community? The handbook talks about vision statements and mission statements. Might sound corporate-y, but it's capturing the heart of your garden,
I always get those two confused, vision and mission. What's the difference, really?
So the handbook describes the vision statement as that big picture dream, aspirational, focused on the long-term impact. Think about it this way. What does the garden achieve for the community beyond just the vegetables it grows?
Okay, so that's the why.
Exactly.
What about the mission statement then?
Mission gets more specific. It's the how. What are the objectives? What are the strategies? Taking that big vision, turning it into steps you can actually take.
I like that. Big dreams, but grounded, actionable.
Yeah.
I bet that helps get people motivated too.
For sure.
Speaking of motivation, maybe not the most exciting part, but we got to talk about legal stuff, rules, permits, all that. Is that in the handbook too?
Definitely. Can't skip this part. It's chapter 2.4, all about making sure you're in the clear legally. Whether the land is public or private, you got to have the right to use it.
I figured there'd be a lot involved. What should we be paying attention to specifically?
So it talks about zoning laws. Basically, what are you allowed to do on that land? might need specific permits based on your location, your plans. And then if it's private land, got to look at formal agreements, leases, that kind of thing.
Ah, okay. So not as easy as just finding an empty spot and digging in. What about if you want to actually build something, like a shed or a greenhouse for the garden?
Yeah, good point. If it's a permanent structure, chances are you'll need building permits. The handbook has info on what kinds, how to get them. It also covers liability, making sure the garden is safe, and that you protect it if any accidents happen.
So much to think about. It's good to be prepared, though. Now, once we've got the location, legal stuff sorted, comes the fun part.
Yeah.
Chapter 2.3, developing a vision and mission. This is where we get to dream big. What do we want this garden to be?
Exactly. This is about more than just what you're planting. It's the garden's purpose, its goals. The handbook gets into vision statements and mission statements. It might sound a bit formal, but it's really about capturing the heart and soul of your garden.
Vision and mission. I always mix those up. What's the difference, really?
The handbook explains it well. A vision statement. Think of it as the big dream. Aspirational, focused on the long-term impact. What do you hope this garden achieves for the community, beyond just the vegetables it produces?
Okay. The why behind it all.
Right.
Then the mission is.
Mission gets more specific. It's the how. What are the actual steps you'll take to make that vision a reality? What are the garden's objectives, its strategies?
I like that. Big dreams, but with concrete actions attached. I bet that helps keep people motivated too. But what about the emotional side of things? How do we want people to feel when they come to this garden?
That's important. And the handbook does touch on that. It talks about creating a space that's welcoming, inclusive, where everyone feels valued. It's about building community, that sense of belonging.
It's more than just logistics. It's creating a feeling and atmosphere.
Exactly. It really is so much more than just, growing vegetables. When I think about community gardens, I think about resilience. Like we talked about the challenges, but getting through those, that's where the magic happens.
I love that. It's like the garden itself, pushing through tough soil to reach the sun. Speaking of soil,
yeah,
I remember from our deep dive on soil health, it's a whole world down there. More complex than people realize.
Absolutely. And this handbook, Chapter 4, it gets into the nitty-gritty of soil health, fertility. Like, do you know there are different types of soil?
Oh, yeah.
Sandy soil, clay soil, loam. Each one's got its own, almost like a personality.
Soil has a personality now.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Think of it like this. Sandy soil, that's the free spirit, right? Drains well, easygoing, but doesn't hold nutrients too well. Clay soil, on the other hand, that's dense, likes to hold on to things, water and nutrients. And then loam, that's the Goldilocks, perfect balance.
So knowing your soil type is key before you even plant anything. It's like trying to bake a cake, but not knowing what flour you have, all-purpose or cake flour. Could get interesting.
Exactly. Gardener needs to know their soil, just like a baker knows their flour. The handbook really encourages getting a soil test. Gives you a full report card,
Yeah.
pH levels, nutrient content, all that.
The soil testing, we talked about that before. It's like a blood test for your garden. But let's say the test shows there are problems, like too acidic or lacking some nutrients. What does the handbooks suggest doing?
Gotta give that soil some TLC. It recommends a bunch of organic approaches, like adding compost. That's like the gourmet meal for soil, right? Or using cover crops. Those are like green manure. They naturally put nutrients back in.
It's amazing how we can work with nature to make that soil healthy.
Okay, so soil is prepped, ready to go. Now for the really fun part, choosing what to plant. Chapter 5 is all about that, I'm guessing.
You got it. Chapter 5, it's a plant lover's dream come true. Covers everything. Choosing the right plants for your climate, your soil, companion planting, planting for different seasons to get the most harvest. It even gets into heirloom varieties, which are super cool. Heirloom varieties. Okay, tell me more about those. I'm picturing some ancient magical seeds passed down for generations.
Pretty close. They come from open pollinated plants, so they've been passed down, exactly like you said, for generations. They often have unique flavors, characteristics you won't find in your average grocery store produce.
That's so cool, like having a little piece of history growing in your garden. But back to the practical side. What are some of the big things to consider when you're choosing plants, especially for a community garden?
The handbook emphasizes climate first and foremost. What thrives in one place might struggle in another, and then soil type, obviously, how much sun the garden gets, the space you've got available.
Right, you don't want a giant zucchini plant taking over everything.
Yeah.
Speaking of space, any tips on maximizing that in a community garden setting?
Oh, yeah. It suggests vertical gardening, so using trellises, hanging planters, growing up instead of out, and then intercropping, which is basically planting different things together in the same space to get the most out of every inch.
Like building a green skyscraper. I love that. Now, what about companion planting? I've heard about that certain plants can actually help each other out when they're planted together. Is that true?
It's totally true. It's like matchmaking, but for plants. Certain combos can deter pests, attract good bugs, even improve the flavor of what you're growing, like classic example, basil planted next to tomatoes that helps repel tomato hornworms, and carrots and onions planted together, they mask each other's scent, so pests have a harder time finding them.
That's amazing. It's like nature's built-in pest control system. Okay, can't talk about gardening without mentioning the uninvited guests, the pests and diseases. Does the handbook offer advice on how to deal with those organically?
Of course. Chapter 5.4 is all about organic pest and disease management. The big emphasis is on prevention, so creating a healthy ecosystem that's naturally resistant. But even the best gardens, things happen, right?
So what do you do when those little critters decide to have a feast on your hard work?
The handbook suggests a bunch of eco-friendly solutions, like we talked about companion planting to deter pests, encouraging beneficial insects like ladybugs, and using natural remedies, things like neem oil or garlic spray.
So working with nature, not against it.
Exactly.
I like that approach.
Yeah.
Now we've talked soil, plants, pest control, but a community garden, it's about so much more than just growing food, right?
You got it. Chapter 6 goes right to the heart of that. Building that community, getting people engaged, creating a space where everyone feels welcome and, empowered. That's the good stuff.
This is what I'm really curious about. What are some of the key things that make for a truly vibrant, successful community garden on that community level?
The handbook talks a lot about open communication, getting everyone involved in decisions, and giving people chances to connect, share their knowledge.
So creating a sense of ownership, shared responsibility. How do you actually do that practically?
It suggests things like organizing social events, potlucks, work parties, things like that, hosting workshops, anything to get people learning, and then creating opportunities for people to share their skills, whatever they're good at.
I love those ideas. The garden becomes a gathering place, not just a place to grow food.
Exactly.
Now, I'm also thinking about leadership. How do you choose a leader or leaders for this garden? What qualities should they have?
It recommends looking for people who are passionate about the garden's goals, of course, but also strong communication, good people skills, and committed to making it a positive, inclusive environment.
So people who can inspire, motivate, guide everyone towards the goal. But it's not just top-down leadership, right?
Nope, it emphasizes distributed leadership. Everyone can take ownership. Everyone has something to contribute.
I love that. A culture of empowerment. Now, we've talked a lot about the social community aspects, but what about the individual benefits of gardening? How does that affect people personally?
Oh, tons of research on this. Gardening is great for mental and physical health, reducing stress, exercise, connecting with nature, boosting your mood.
Therapy, but with dirt under your nails.
Right. And when it's a community garden, those benefits are even stronger.
You're sharing the experience.
Exactly. You get to share knowledge, learn from each other, make friends.
It's like a support group, but with tomatoes and sunflowers.
I love that. Okay, we've covered the social, emotional, personal benefits. Does the handbook address the environmental impact of these gardens at all?
Good question.
It does. Community gardens have a big role to play in sustainability.
Okay, in what ways?
Well, first off, they cut down on food miles because the food's grown right there locally.
Yeah.
And they encourage organic methods, which are better for both people and the planet.
Makes sense. When you grow your own food, you know exactly what went into it.
Yeah.
Now I'm wondering, the role of community gardens in terms of food insecurity.
Yeah, that's a big one.
What does the handbook say about that?
They're being recognized more and more as a tool to fight food insecurity, especially in cities where access to fresh, healthy food can be tough.
So it's not just about growing food, it's about making sure everyone has access to good food.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, are there examples in the handbook of gardens specifically doing that, tackling food insecurity?
There are. Chapter 7 highlights some amazing examples. Gardens that are working to increase access in underserved communities, doing really inspiring work.
That's fantastic. I love that they're addressing both the social and environmental sides. Win-win for everyone. Okay, we've looked at the social, the environmental, the personal benefits. What about the economic impact? Can community gardens actually help the local economy?
They can. They can create jobs, support local businesses, even boost property values in the area.
So good for the soul and the wallet. Any tips in the handbook on making a community garden sustainable financially?
Yeah, it suggests looking into different income-generating stuff, selling produce at markets, hosting events or workshops, maybe partnering with local businesses.
Being resourceful, creative.
Exactly.
Okay, we've covered a ton in this deep dive. The practical stuff like soil and plants, and the bigger impacts on society, the environment. But for someone thinking about starting a community garden, what's the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Honestly, I'd say do your research, connect with other people doing it, and don't be afraid to ask for help.
Makes sense. It can feel like a big task.
It can, but you don't have to go it alone. There's so many resources, so much support out there. So yeah, tap into that, build a strong team, and most importantly, have fun.
Have fun. I love that. Okay, so we've got our team, we've got our location, we've got our plan, ready to roll up our sleeves and get digging. But before we do, I'm curious about the emotional side of all this.
Yeah.
Starting a community garden, it can be challenging, but ultimately it's rewarding, right? What advice would you give to someone feeling overwhelmed or discouraged?
Remember your why. Why did you start this whole thing? What are you hoping to achieve? When you reconnect to that purpose, it gives you the energy to get through the tough parts.
It's about that inner spark.
Exactly.
What about the role of community support? How important is it to have people who believe in your vision, who are willing to pitch in?
Oh, that's essential. Community support is what makes it all work. Surround yourself with people who get excited about this stuff, who are willing to get their hands dirty, and who will cheer you on.
That shared responsibility. Okay, we've covered so much ground, from the details of planning to that inspiring vision of a thriving community garden. For someone just starting out, what's that one key piece of advice you'd offer?
Start small. Don't try to do everything at once. Build a strong foundation first, then you can grow from there.
Start small, dream big. I like that. And never be afraid to get your hands dirty. Now, what about the future of all this? What trends are you seeing in community gardening? What gets you excited?
One thing I'm seeing is this growing interest in permaculture principles being used in garden design. Permaculture is all about creating sustainable ecosystems, mimicking what we see in nature.
Permaculture. Definitely adding that to our list of future deep dives. Anything else on the horizon?
Also seeing more and more technology being used, which is interesting. Sensor-based watering systems, online platforms for communication, data sharing. It's really evolving.
So embracing the new stuff while staying true to the core values. Now, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. We've explored all the practical steps, the legal stuff, inspiring examples. But what about the benefits you can't measure? The feeling of a community garden, what makes it special?
That's a beautiful question. I think those intangible benefits are what make it magical. That sense of peace when you're surrounded by nature. The joy of sharing a meal with people, food you all grew together, the feeling of connection, working towards a common goal.
It's about nurturing more than just plants. It's relationships, community, hope.
Exactly.
It really is amazing how those benefits, they kind of ripple outwards. You start with a seed, you end up with a stronger community, a healthier planet, like you said, a more joyful way of life. But speaking of ripples, I'm curious about these emerging trends in community gardening we talked about. What else is out there besides permaculture and all the tech stuff?
Well, the handbook mentions therapeutic gardens, which I thought was really interesting.
Okay.
So these are designed specifically for mental well-being, to create peace, tranquility. It's recognizing the power of nature to heal, you know?
Therapeutic gardens. I love that. Like bringing the spa experience to the community garden. What else caught your eye?
There's a growing movement towards edible landscapes, actually incorporating them into public spaces.
Oh, wow.
So imagine walking down the street and you see fruit trees, berry bushes, herbs.
Instead of just like decorative plants.
Exactly.
That would be amazing, like turning our cities into edible forests.
It's a cool idea.
Delicious, and it connects people to nature, fresh food.
Totally. And it ties into the whole food justice movement too, you know? Making sure everyone has access to good food, no matter their income, where they live. Community gardens are a big part of that, providing produce, education, empowerment.
It's a systemic change, really. Okay, so we've talked about the present, the future of community gardening.
Yeah.
What about the past? Does the handbook get into the history of all this?
It does. Chapter 8 traces it way back, like ancient civilizations. It's pretty fascinating to see how it's evolved across time and cultures.
So it's not just a modern thing. It's something that's been with us for a long time.
Definitely not.
What are some of the big moments in how community gardening has developed?
It highlights how important gardens were during times of crisis, wars, depressions. When food was scarce, people turned to community gardens to provide for themselves, their families.
Not just a source of food, but a symbol of resilience coming together.
Exactly.
What about the modern community garden movement as we know it? When did that start?
It traces that back to the 1970s here in the U.S., time of a lot of activism, social and environmental, people wanting to connect with nature, build community.
Born from a desire for change? It's amazing to see how that's grown into a global movement.
It really is.
But like any movement, I'm sure there have been challenges along the way. What are some of the things community gardens have had to overcome?
One of the biggest has always been access to land, especially in urban areas. Finding affordable land that works for a garden, that's a big hurdle.
Can't grow food on concrete. How they dealt with that?
They've gotten creative, turning vacant lots into gardens, rooftops, schoolyards. And they've also had to advocate for policies that support community gardening, make land easier to access.
Resourcefulness, resilience.
Yeah.
Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to come back to the emotional side of all this.
Okay.
We've talked about the benefits, social, environmental, economic.
Yeah.
But what about those things you can't really measure? The feeling of a community garden.
That's the heart of it, right? It's that sense of peace, belonging, the joy of watching things grow, sharing what you've grown. It's about nurturing more than just plants. It's relationships, community, hope.
Beautifully said. I think you've captured what makes it so special. A community garden is a testament to human connection, the resilience of nature, the hope that we can create a better world. So to all our listeners, if you're feeling inspired, go find a garden near you. Or even better, start your own.
Yes.
It'll nourish your soul, connect you with your community, and leave something beautiful behind. Happy gardening, everyone.
Happy gardening.